Welcome to this tutorial where we're going to bring to life a beautiful yet simple bar illustration. We're going to use brushes from many of the different brush sets that I have, including the bar brush set, the floral brush set, and also we're going to add a couple of candles and some lamps for the top of the bar. The bar is going to be a round bar that is a light green in colour with a few details on there that we're going to hand render. There's going to be a large floral centerpiece in the middle of the bar that's going to be in a white vase, and it's going to be a really full and lush arrangement with lots and lots of yellow florals. And then the statement piece is going to be a ceiling arrangement that hangs over the top of the bar, and we're going to have two different layers of circular structure, and then again these lovely yellow florals just billowing out from the top of the structures. So I've got some resources to share with you so that you can follow along with this tutorial if you like. I'll share with you a PDF which has a link to a Dropbox folder, and in this folder there's going to be a few resources for you, including a colour palette of all the colours we're going to use in the illustration. I'll share with you my final illustration so you have something to reference whilst you work alongside this video, and I'll also share with you a design inspiration collage which again you can use to refer back and forth when you do your illustration. So the first thing I'm going to do is change the background of our canvas, and to do this I'm going to click on this bottom layer called background colour, and then I'm just going to go and select a light colour from any of your colour palettes just so that we can contrast any of the white elements we're going to add. And we can go and change this at the end of the illustration. We can add a backdrop, we can insert an image, or we can just select a different colour to contrast with our illustration. So the first thing I'm going to do is add a new layer, and we're going to start with the bar. So I'm going to go into the bar brush set, and I'm going to have a look for a circular bar that I want to use, and I think I'm going to select number 50 here. I'm going to go into our colour palette and I'm going to select the second colour in our colour palette, and I'm going to tap that on the screen. Use a uniform tool to just resize the bar and centre it on your screen. I'll just move it down to the bottom slightly so we can fit the aerial arrangement in over the top. And if you like, here's where you can just rescale the brush stamp to a size that you think looks good. And now I'm going to swipe left, duplicate that layer, selecting that bottom layer, select white from the colour palette, or alternatively just tap 2 times in this area here on your colour wheel. I'm going to drag that colour into the shape, and you'll find here if your white colour when you drop it in fills the whole screen like this, it just means your colour drop threshold is too high. So what you need to do is just move your stylus down to the left, and you can see this percentage reducing, and you just bring it down until it gets to a point where you can see that background and the white only fills this shape. So now I'm going to add a new layer above that white layer and set it as a clipping mask, and that just means any colour that we add now will only fill the white that we've laid down in this shape, which is great because it means you haven't got to worry about keeping inside the lines. So going back to that second colour, and I'm just going to lighten it slightly. I'm going to go into the basic brush set, select the watercolour brush, and what I'm going to do is, for now, just add a layer of it over the entire shape, and we'll come back and change any details. For example, the white, the top is going to be white of this bar, but for now we'll just work kind of messily and lay the colour down. And then I'm going to select the third colour in. And again, you might want to lighten it, just use your eye to decide which colour looks right. And this is going to just give us a little bit of light to our bar. So I'm going to imagine the sun is coming in, or any light source is coming in from the top right, and it just allows you to add your light and shade in a way where it's consistent throughout your illustration. If I imagine the light's coming in from the top right, everything kind of top and right on the bar is going to just have a little bit more light to it. So I'm just going to lay this lighter colour down here. And you can do a few layers of that to add some depth. And then selecting the next colour in, the darker version of this colour, I'm going to darken the central area. And add a little bit more of the dark colour to the left and lower edges of the bar. And now you're going to go and select your smudge tool. So in the basic brush set, the wet smudge tool, and you're just going to come in and blend those colours in together. And then if you want to make any adjustments to the whole colour, what I'm going to do is go into the adjustments tool. I'm going to select hue, saturation and brightness. I'm just going to add a little bit more saturation, increase the brightness slightly. And now I'm just going to make the top surface of this bar just a simple white colour. So I'm going to go into the basic brush set and select the round brush. Again, select white. You can zoom in if you want, and you're just going to come into the top shape here and just add a layer of white. And then I'm just going to add a little bit of shadow to the bar. So I'm just going to bring the colour down a little bit. So we've got a nice grey. Selecting that watercolour brush and just add a little bit of shadow to this edge here. And again, just smudge that in. And now I want to go and decide if I want to have this outline layer on or off or change the colour. So by selecting the top layer that we originally put down, you can toggle it on and off and see if you prefer it with or without that outline. I like it with the outline, but I'm not happy with the colour, so I'm going to hold 2 fingers on that layer, select colour fill, and what that does is fill all those lines with the colour you have selected up here. And now whilst that's selected, you can go and select different colours and just see what colour you think works nicely. And make any adjustments up here if you need. And what I'm going to do, I'll group those together, and that is our bar outline done. Now I'm just going to add a few little bits of detail to the bar because this bar has like a little bit of white pattern just along the edges. So in our colour layer here, I'm just going to add a new layer above again. I'll select it as a clipping mask and selecting the white that we were using previously. I'm going to go select that shading brush, increase the opacity to 100%. I'm just reduce the size down. What I'm going to do is add a few elements along this line here just to add some detail on the bar. So you're going to freehand draw a line that follows the bottom line of the bar, and then just hold your stylus at the end to create a smooth line. you're going to duplicate that line, just moving it up slightly, move it down slightly, work in this section down here. You can merge those two together, and again creating a new layer. Just going to add just a few dash details in between our two lines here. And then what I'm going to do is duplicate that whole layer, and I'm going to move another one of these up to the top. And you can see the perspective doesn't quite work at the top, so what we need to do is, and using our warp tool here, we're just going to move these lines up until they follow the line of the top of the bar here. So moving on to the overhead structure, what I'm going to do is try and use the elements we've already created so that we haven't got to draw any more parts. So I'm going to take this white bottom bar layer, I'm going to duplicate it, move it out of this group into its own layer. And you'll see actually doing that just erased my clipping mask. So feel free to just go in and reset those clipping masks. So on this new layer, I'm going to get my select tool, select uniform, I'm going to do a vertical flip, and I'm going to place this above our bar. And you see by doing that, it's perfectly mirrored the bar shape and the perspective is correct. So sometimes you haven't got to create parts from scratch. You can just use other brushes, copy and paste different elements to create the look that you're going for. So I'm going to make this slightly shorter. So I'm going to go freeform. Using this blue toggle, I'm just going to make the shape slightly shorter like this. And I'm going to move it down slightly because what we're going to do is have our florals going kind of along the top edge of the structure, and then below it there'll be a smaller version. So for now I'll leave that as it is, and we're going to add the flowers in, and then what we'll do is duplicate that flower layer and the structure down to create that second layer, so you're not creating everything twice. So adding a layer above, I'm going to add a little bit of greenery just as a base for the florals, although there's not going to be a lot of the greenery showing through the flowers because there's going to be quite a lot of flowers laid over the top. So go into your greenery 2 brush set and select greenery brush number 29. In the colour palette we're going to set this dark green here. And then I'm going to just build up some layers of leaves just following the top line of the structure. And this is kind of going to give us the base for where we're going to add the flowers over the top. So just keep adding the greenery until you can't see any of that white behind there. And then I will select the lighter green and just add a little bit of variation on top of that layer. And I'll just select one more lighter green colour. Like so. And now we can start adding our florals. So there's going to be quite a few different variety of florals in a few different tones of yellow. So let's go into the flower brush set. And let's start off just by selecting Peony brush number 8. But feel free to select any brush you like. This is a good chance to kind of explore what all the different brushes do and which ones you like the best. And then this bottom layer of colour palette here is going to be some of the yellows we're going to use. But again, feel free to just select and adjust as you go so you have a lot of different varieties of yellow. So I'm going to start by selecting this first colour. I'm going to add a new layer above that greenery layer. I want to just show you how we can quickly create this floral design. I don't want to go into too much detail. I just want to quickly lay down some layers of colour and just show you how you really quickly can represent a design concept. Let's duplicate that layer so those colours are brighter, and I'll merge that down. New layer. New brush and a new colour. Let's select this one along here. And just start filling in those gaps. So we start to kind of cover some of the greenery that we've placed down. Again, I'm going to duplicate that, merge it down, and then selecting another brush, I'm going to add some lighter kind of butter coloured florals. And again, add these in between some of the flowers that you've already laid down. And you can see sometimes that these brushes can be a little bit translucent, and it gives you the opportunity to, especially when you're creating like larger illustrations where you can really focus on each flower, you can go in and layer up the detail behind the brush. Or in this instance, it's very simple just to then go and duplicate the layers so they're not so see-through, like this. And I definitely recommend keeping these different flower colours on different layers so you can go back and adjust the colours once we get to the end. So now I'm going to add a little bit of this bold colour in and around the arrangement. And if you have specific florals that you're using in your concept, then obviously you can select the brush that best represents the florals that are going to be in the arrangements. But if not, you have a big variety to choose from. And there's often brushes you can use to kind of represent different colours. So now what I'm going to do is just go into each of these layers and just adjust the hue, saturation and brightness until we just get the colours we like. Adding brightness, reducing brightness, adding or reducing saturation just to make these really stand out. And I'm happy with what we've created there. So what I'm going to do is move now down to the arrangement that's going to sit in the middle of the bar. And I want to move to this step now because you've just laid down all the flowers and greeneries once. So if we leave it half an hour and focus on the rest of the illustration, we'll probably forget which colours and which flowers we use to create what we've created up here. So it's nice sometimes to just hop onto a different arrangement if it's using the same flowers and colours, just so you're already kind of, your brain's already there, you know which brushes you've used. So I'm just going to go into the basic brush set and I'm just going to create a real simple outline of where I want this arrangement to be. And doing this is a great way when you first start an illustration just to get your scale right, to check that the arrangement represents your design. I'll just reduce the opacity down just so we can see where we're working. And we're just going to go back through all those steps. So selecting greenery 29, select that darkest green, and using that template we've just created, just lay down some darker greenery. And then add some lighter greenery over the top. On a new layer, going into the flower brush set, or alternatively going into your recent brush set here, you can see the brushes that you've used. This is why it's quite good to jump into different arrangements when they're using the same flowers, because this recent brush set will show you your last 10 brushes. So I know now that I started with this brush, then this one, and so forth. So I can go back, select that peony brush. So start selecting similar colours and just tap these flowers in over the top of the greenery. Again, I'll duplicate those, add a new layer, finding that next brush, which is number 4 rose, selecting the next colour, and then just tap on the screen in between the original flowers. This is quite a compact arrangement, so not too many florals kind of going outside the line. I'll duplicate those, select that next brush, which was a lighter colour, and all these flower brush stamps are pressure sensitive, so if you're using a pressure sensitive stylus, the harder you press, the larger they come out. So if you do get one that's too large, just 2 fingers on the screen undoes that last stamp. Okay, so I'll duplicate that layer, and then for our last floral layer, select the next brush, and then as we did the top, just go and add some of these more orange flowers just in and around the arrangement. And if you want to go back through and change the hue and saturation and the brightness, that now's the time to go and do that, but I'll leave this as it is for now. I'll group those together. I can delete that layer that we created our outline with, and I'll turn it off for now, and we'll go back up to the top and just duplicate this floral layer down. So I'm going to take all the flowers and the greenery, and I'm going to merge these into one. At this point, I'm happy with how this looks. If you ever think you want to go and make changes to any of the layers, just leave them separate so you have the ability to go in and adjust them. But if you're happy with how it is, or you're trying to save layers, then you can always merge them down. What I generally do is select them, put them in a group. I'll duplicate the group and flatten one of them down, and then this original one I usually place down at the bottom of my layers, and I might rename it as floral template or something like that. So if I ever go too far and I want to go back to the original, I always have those separate layers down here, but right now I can work off of these elements just being this flower layer all together and the structure below. So to make this pop, let's create some shadows. So I'm going to duplicate that flower layer, select the bottom layer. What I'm going to do is just move this down and left slightly. Selecting your adjustments tool, hue, saturation and brightness. going to bring the brightness down to 0 so that it's completely black, that layer. Back into the adjustments menu, and I'm going to select Gaussian blur, and just moving my stylus up and right on the screen, you can just blur that layer down here. I'm going to use my watercolour brush as an eraser and just get rid of the kind of top parts of the shadow, because obviously we wouldn't have shadow on the top of these flowers, only underneath them. So we just kind of want to keep the very bottom portion of that layer. And then going into the layer, just reduce the opacity down so those flowers have a lovely shadow behind them. And we're going to move this down one more time. So I'm going to select the flowers, the shadow layer, and the structure, group those together, duplicate that whole group, and then with this bottom group, I'm going to use the select tool, move this down on the screen. I'm going to reduce the size slightly, and I'm going to move it up above that other group. And what you're going to do is place this layer underneath the original layer so that it's a kind of a double tiered structure. So I'm going to just turn the flowers and the shadows off here. In fact, I can just merge those into one to save my layers. And then what I want to do is just make sure the perspective is correct on this layer. I think this curve here is too curved. So I'm going to use my select tool and freeform, and I'm just going to bring that down slightly, somewhere around there. And then I'm going to take those flowers, just place them here, and then selecting that flower layer, I'm just going to go in and reduce the opacity down slightly. I just want to remove any of the flowers that sit kind of overlapping this structure, because I want these flowers to look like they're set within the structure that's at the top. So again, the round brush as an eraser, just going to follow this line that's in, that we can see through the flowers here. And then just for a bit of variation, I might flip this layer. I'm going to leave it something like that. And I just want to add a little bit of shadow to the underside of these structures. So I'm going to go select the structure, add a layer, set it as a clipping mask. And with a small brush and grey selected, I'm just going to come in, just add a little bit of shadow underneath. A little bit along the front here. And then using a small smudge brush, just merge those in. And I'll do the same with that top structure, add a clipping mask above, add a tiny bit of detail. Like so, and then we're going to move on to a vase to go underneath floral arrangement here. So I'm going to add a new layer that sits below our flowers, and I'll turn those off for now so we can just work on that vase layer. Go into the vase as brush set and just select whichever vase you think would work nicely with these flowers. I'm going to go for this simple vase number 8. It's going to be a white vase, so I'll select white for the outline. I'll just enlarge it now so we can work on it and we can resize it a little later on. Duplicate that layer and add white. Add a layer above and set as a clipping mask. And then back to the watercolour brush, and that previous light grey we've just used to create our shadows. Just want to create a little bit of shadow on this vase, but not too much. and then selecting that smudge brush, just blend those in together. And that's as simple as this needs to be. So I'll select those 3 layers and group them together. Turn on that floral arrangement group, and then selecting the vase group, we're just going to move this underneath the florals, and again we can adjust it if we like. And then once you're happy with the placement of it, kind of want it to be sat as if it stood on the floor in between the bar. So I'm going to erase this front section here. And I think this is actually perfect. I'm not going to add the candles or the lamps. Actually, I think I'm going to leave this as it is. It's a really comprehensive concept design visual that you can show to your clients and say, like, this is what I'm thinking, these are the florals, these are the amount of florals you can get for your budget, this is the structure I'm thinking of. And so the only thing left to do, you can either leave it as it is like this, play around with that background colour, add the watercolour effect, add text, add your logo, all those good things. I'm just going to add a couple of little elements here just to make this really stand out. So I'm going to create a new layer right at the bottom. Using my select tool and the rectangle option, I'm just going to select an area at the bottom of the screen. I'm just going to lighten it up slightly, and that just distinguishes the floor area nicely. And you can use that smudge brush just to blend that in so it's not such a harsh line. We might want to add a shadow that just sits underneath that bar edge, so I'm going to select the shading brush, reduce that opacity down, and just create a little shadow along this front edge. And then all I'm going to do to finish this off is add a watercolour layer effect. So creating a new layer at the top of all your layers, select white and drop white into the screen. Just lower the opacity slightly so we can see the illustration through the white. Selecting the watercolour brush as an eraser with lower opacity, just take a little bit of that white off the screen. And now we can go bring that opacity back up, as now we can actually see the illustration. And then you're just going to keep removing white until you're happy with the final look. And that's our illustration all finished. Again, all the resources you need are in the link that I'll share with you. So feel free to follow along with this tutorial, and you've got the colour palette and everything if you want to use the colours that I've used. If you need to add any of these brush sets to your Procreate library, then there'll be a link to the Etsy shop where you can either buy a whole bundle, which saves you a little bit of money, where you get like flowers, the bars, the greenery, or you can alternatively just purchase the brush sets individually and just build up your collection over time. So I hope you really enjoyed this tutorial, and if you want to enjoy 30 free Procreate brushes and colour palettes, then there's a link in the description below where I'll share with you my favourite brushes, and they'll be sent to your inbox and you can add these to your Procreate library today. And then feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel and follow along with any of the free resources I have using your free brushes, and start to learn how you can elevate your design presentations today.